a minute, Crow. I usually say hello first. Sorry. Hello. Crow's worried. You know, you often get worried, Crow, don't you? You've got something to do. Okay, what have you got to do? It's impossible. Oh dear, it's impossible. Why is it impossible? Because it's hard. So what have you got to do, Crow? You're going to be in a play? Well, that sounds really good. You think it's impossible that you'll get everything right? You've got to remember your lines. You've got to carry the things around. You've not got to drop them. And you've not got to fall off the stage. Well, yeah, they're all quite hard to do. But you know what? I'm sure you can manage it. You think it's impossible? Well, I wonder what the children think. Do they think it's impossible? Shall we ask them? Okay, what do you think? Do you think it's impossible for Crow to go do all those things right? No, I'm sure they said it wasn't impossible. But listen, Crow, you can have help. Your teachers and the other people involved in the play will help you. Okay, and God will help you as well if you pray and ask him to help. Am I sure? Yes, I am sure. And you know why I'm sure? It's because God's helped people to do impossible things in the past. And we'll hear in our story today about someone who had something that everybody said was impossible to do. So, settle down, Crow. Listen to the story. Today's story is about two groups of people, the Philistines and the Israelites. The Israelites are the good guys, so during the story, whenever I mention their name, give a thumbs up and maybe a little cheer. The Philistines, though, were the baddies, so give a thumbs down and maybe a little boo. But don't make too much noise, because otherwise you'll miss the next bit of the story. Okay, let's get on. The Philistines and the Israelites never got on. The Israelites worshipped God and tried to do what he told them. But the Philistines worshipped gods that were made out of wood and stone. They also did lots of nasty things that God didn't like. The Philistines were generally not very nice. The Israelite army and the Philistine army were camped at opposite sides of a big valley. The Israelites were on one hill and the Philistines were on another. Now there was one Philistine who was meaner and nastier and uglier than all the others. The Israelites were really scared of him. He was called Goliath, and he was also very, very tall, about 3 meters. Each day he'd come out of the camp, wave to the other Philistines and snarl at the Israelites. He'd growl and say, "You Israelites are all wimps. I'm a Philistine, a real man. Pick one of your soldiers to fight me. If he wins, we'll be your slaves. But if I win, you Israelites will be the slaves of the Philistines." All the Israelites were too scared to accept the challenge. They thought it was impossible that any of them could beat Goliath. They hid in their tents and prayed that God would help them. This went on for about a month. Then, one day, a young boy called David was visiting his brothers in the Israelite camp to take them some food. Now David heard Goliath shouting at the Israelites and growling at them. He was a bit puzzled. He frowned and scratched his head. He plucked up courage and went to the king. Your Majesty, why isn't anyone fighting Goliath?" David asked. "Well, he's a bit big and he's a bit nasty," the king replied. "But you've got God on your side," David said. "God is bigger and better than any Philistine. If God wants you to win, then he'll help anyone to defeat Goliath. You know, even I could do it. Nothing is impossible for God." The king was a bit taken aback. David explained that he'd have to fight animals with his sling whilst he was looking after his dad's sheep. God had always protected him then. So the king agreed to let David go and fight Goliath. David went to a little stream and picked up 5 round stones. He collected his sling and went out to the Philistine camp. A sling is a bit of material that you put a stone in, you swing it round your head, and then you let go of one end, and the stone flies out and hopefully hits your enemy. When the Philistines saw David, they laughed at him and called him names. Then Goliath came and growled and called David a wimp. Dave stood where he was and said, "You might have lots of armour and swords and javelins and spears and shields and all sorts of neat stuff like that, but I've got God on my side, so you'd better watch out." He put a stone in his sling and whirled it around and around, and the stone left the sling, flew through the air, did a loop-the-loop, and hit Goliath on the forehead. Goliath swayed and shook and collapsed to the ground. David quickly ran up to him, grabbed his sword, and finished Goliath off. The Israelites cheered, and the Philistines were terrified. If a little boy like David could defeat Goliath with God's help, nothing would be impossible. What would the whole army do? The Philistines screamed and ran in terror, whilst the Israelites, well, they threw a party. David knew that God would help him to do something that most people thought was impossible. He wasn't put off by the other people. He knew that God could be trusted. When we have something hard to do, we shouldn't be put off by people who tell us that it's impossible or that we couldn't possibly do it. We should stick to it and do our best. David needed help from God. God will help us, but we might need help from other people too. David was only young, and he showed people a lot older than him what was possible with God's help. So I challenge you, over the next few weeks, show people older than you how great you can be. Have a go at something you find hard, and show that it's not impossible after all. Let other people see what they might think is impossible is possible. And remember that David trusted God and could do the impossible with him.